She sat in the back of the mahogany-panelled library, clutching her 8-month pregnant belly, invisible to the vultures circling the room. They didn't just ignore her, they laughed at her. Julian Thorne, her billionaire husband, clinked his scotch glass against his mistress's diamond ring and whispered, "By noon, that gold digger will be on the street." He thought the reading of his father's will was just a formality, a coronation for the family prince. He was wrong. Dead wrong. What happened in the next hour wouldn't just destroy Julian's ego. It would rewrite the history of the entire Thorne dynasty and expose a secret so dark the family had buried it for 30 years. You think you know how this ends? You have no idea. The funeral of Arthur Thorne was exactly like the man himself, cold, expensive, and attended by people who cared more about the net worth of the deceased than the loss of a human life. The rain over the private cemetery in Greenwich, Connecticut, felt relentless, turning the manicured earth into a slick, grey mud. Hannah Thorne stood at the edge of the grave, her heels sinking slightly into the wet grass. At 8 months pregnant, simply standing was a trial. Her back ached with a dull, throbbing rhythm, and her ankles were swollen against the straps of her shoes. But it wasn't the physical pain that made her tremble. It was the isolation. She was the wife of the sole heir, Julian Thorne. Yet she stood alone. 10 feet away, under a sprawling black umbrella held by a chauffeur, stood her husband. Julian didn't look like a grieving son. He looked like a man waiting for a slow waiter to bring the check. He checked his limited edition Patek Philippe watch, a scowl marring his handsome, sharp features. Standing intimately close to him, her hand tucked possessively into the crook of his arm, was Savannah Rain. Savannah was everything Hannah wasn't currently. Slender, glamorous, and draped in a vintage Chanel coat that cost more than Hannah's entire upbringing. She wasn't family. She wasn't a wife. She was Julian's executive assistant, a title that fooled absolutely no one, especially not the tabloids. "Stop slouching, Hannah. You look like a wet dog," a sharp voice hissed from the left. Hannah flinched, turning to see Beatrice Thorne, her mother-in-law. The matriarch of the Thorne Empire was a woman made of steel and Botox. Even at 70, Beatrice commanded the space around her with terrifying precision. "I'm sorry, Beatrice," Hannah whispered, straightening her posture despite the sharp pain in her lower back. "I'm just feeling a bit lightheaded." "Save the theatrics for someone who buys them," Beatrice snapped, adjusting her pearl choker. "Arthur is gone. The only reason you're still standing here is because you're carrying Thorne DNA. But don't think for a second that guarantees you a seat at the table once the earth covers my husband's casket." Hannah bit her lip to keep the tears from falling. She had loved Arthur. In a house filled with sharks, the old billionaire had been the only one to show her a flicker of kindness. He had been the one to ask about her day, the one who demanded the staff bring her herbal tea when the morning sickness was at its worst. Now that he was gone, her only shield was gone. The priest finished his final prayer. As the crowd began to disperse, moving toward the fleet of black SUVs, waiting to shuttle them back to the Thorne Manor for the reading of the will, Julian finally acknowledged his wife. He walked past her, Savannah clinging to his side, and stopped without turning his head. "Don't ride with us," Julian said, his voice low and devoid of emotion. "Savannah and I need to discuss the transition of the company assets. Take the staff car." "Julian," Hannah pleaded softly, reaching out to touch his sleeve. "Please, I'm your wife. People are staring. Can't we just—" He pulled his arm away as if she were contagious. He turned then, looking her up and down with a sneer of disgust that made her blood run cold. "Look at you, Hannah. You're a mess. You're swollen, you're emotional, and frankly, you're embarrassing me. Arthur tolerated you because he was going senile. I don't have that defect." He leaned in closer, his cologne, a scent she used to love, now smelling like betrayal. "Enjoy the ride back. It's likely the last time you'll ever sit in a luxury vehicle." Savannah giggled, a sharp, cruel sound, and pulled Julian toward the lead limousine. Hannah was left standing in the rain as the heavy car doors slammed shut. The driver of the staff car, an older man named Thomas who had served the family for decades, opened the door of the station wagon for her. His eyes held a pity that hurt worse than Julian's scorn. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Thorne," Thomas murmured. "It's okay, Thomas," she said, her voice breaking. "Just get me to the house. I just want to get this over with." The drive to Thorne Manor took 20 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. The estate was a sprawling Gothic revival mansion that sat on 300 acres of prime real estate. It was a fortress of old money. Today, it felt like a prison. When Hannah entered the foyer, the atmosphere was already buzzing with the energy of greed. The guests who had been invited back, board members, distant cousins and business partners, were sipping Arthur's vintage wine and speculating on the numbers. "I heard the estate is valued at $4 billion, a man in a grey suit whispered near the coat check. "Julian is going to liquidate the tech division immediately," another replied. "He's been waiting for the old man to kick the bucket for 5 years. Hannah navigated through the crowd, keeping her head down. She needed to sit. She needed water. But as she moved toward the kitchen, her path was blocked by Harrison Blackwood. Harrison was the family's long-time attorney and the executor of Arthur's estate. He was a man of few words, known for his stoic demeanor and brilliant legal mind. He was perhaps the only person Julian feared, simply because Harrison knew where all the bodies were buried, metaphorically and perhaps literally, in a business sense. "Mrs. Thorne," Harrison said, nodding respectfully. It was the first time anyone had addressed her with respect all day. "Mr. Blackwood," Hannah replied, wiping rain from her cheek. "Is it time?" "Almost," Harrison said. He looked at her, his grey eyes analyzing her state. "Are you all right, Hannah? You look pale." "I'm fine," she lied. "Just tired." Harrison lowered his voice, leaning in slightly. "I need you to stay strong today, Hannah. What is about to happen in that library, it's going to be intense. Whatever Julian says, whatever Beatrice does, do not leave that room until I dismiss you. Do you understand?" A shiver ran down Hannah's spine. The lawyer's tone wasn't just professional, it was urgent. "Harrison, what do you mean? Is something wrong?" "Just promise me," he insisted. "I promise," she whispered. "Good. Go take your seat. The wolves are already at the table." Harrison turned and walked toward the heavy double doors of the library. Hannah took a deep breath, placing a protective hand over her unborn daughter. She didn't care about the money. She didn't care about the mansion. She just wanted enough to leave. She wanted to take her baby and disappear, far away from Julian and his cruelty. She pushed open the doors and stepped into the lion's den. The library of Thorne Manor was designed to intimidate. The walls were lined with first-edition books that had never been read, and the air smelled of beeswax and old leather. At the center of the room sat a massive oak conference table. Julian sat at the head of the table, naturally. It was Arthur's seat, but Julian had claimed it before the body was even cold. To his right sat Beatrice, looking like a queen regent. To his left, shockingly, sat Savannah. The audacity took Hannah's breath away. The mistress was sitting at the family table during the reading of the will, while the wife was left standing near the door. "Oh, look," Julian announced loudly, silencing the murmurs of the gathered relatives and board members. "The charity case has arrived." Laughter rippled through the room. It was sycophantic laughter, the kind people produce when they want to please the man with the checkbook. "There are no seats left at the main table, Hannah," Beatrice said, not looking up from her phone. "There's a folding chair in the corner near the fiction section. Fitting, considering your marriage was a fairy tale lie." Hannah felt the heat rise in her cheeks. She silently walked to the back of the room. Thomas, the kindly driver, had indeed set up a simple wooden chair in the corner, far removed from the inner circle. She sat down, the wooden slats digging into her back, and folded her hands over her belly. Harrison Blackwood entered the room a moment later, carrying a thick leather briefcase. The room fell instantly silent. The power dynamic shifted. Julian might be the heir, but in this moment, Harrison held the keys. Harrison sat at the opposite end of the table from Julian. He opened his briefcase with deliberate slowness, arranging a stack of documents, a water glass, and a sealed videotape. "Good afternoon," Harrison said, his voice deep and resonant. "We are gathered here to execute the last will and testament of Arthur William Thorne." "Let's skip the preamble, Harrison," Julian interrupted, swirling his drink. "We all know the drill. 10% to charity to keep the IRS off our backs, a stipend for Mother, and the rest to me. Just sign the papers so I can kick everyone out and get some sleep." Harrison looked up over his spectacles. "Arthur's instructions were very specific, Julian. He requested that his final video testament be played before the reading of the asset distribution." "Video?" Julian scoffed. God, he was dramatic until the end. "Fine. Play the movie. Let's hear the old man ramble about hard work and integrity one last time." Harrison pressed a button on a remote, and a large screen descended from the ceiling. The projector hummed to life. The image of Arthur Thorne flickered onto the screen. He was sitting in this very library, wearing his favorite cardigan. He looked frail, but his eyes, piercing blue eyes that Julian had inherited, were sharp. "If you are watching this," the video version of Arthur said, "then I am gone, and I assume the room is filled with people pretending to miss me." An uncomfortable silence settled over the room. "I have built an empire from nothing," Arthur continued. "I sacrificed my time, my health, and relationships to build Thorne Enterprises. For a long time, I thought I was building it for my son." On the screen, Arthur paused, looking directly into the camera lens. It felt like he was looking right at Julian. But a man sees things clearly when the end is near. He sees who truly loves him, and who loves his wallet. He sees who has honor, and who has only hunger. Julian rolled his eyes, whispering something to Savannah, who covered her mouth to suppress a giggle. "To my wife, Beatrice," Arthur said, "you were a shark when I met you, and you remain one. We made a good team in business, if not in love. You retain the master suite and a monthly allowance of $50,000, provided you never attempt to contest this will." Beatrice's face tightened. $50,000 a month was a fortune to most, but to her, it was an insult. It was a budget. "That senile old fool," she muttered. "To my son, Julian," Arthur continued. Julian straightened up, buttoning his suit jacket, ready for the handover of billions. "Julian, I gave you the best education money could buy. I gave you VP positions you didn't earn. I cleaned up your scandals. I paid off the women you hurt." The room went deadly quiet. Savannah shifted uncomfortably. "I hoped fatherhood would change you. I hoped marriage to a good woman would ground you. But I watched you, Julian. I watched how you treated Hannah." Hannah's breath hitched. She stared at the screen, tears welling up. Arthur had noticed. "I watched you mock her. I watched you cheat on her. I know about Savannah Rain. I know about the apartment in Soho. I know about the offshore accounts you tried to hide from me." Julian slammed his hand on the table. "This is ridiculous. He was on heavy medication. Harrison, turn this off." "Sit down, Mr. Thorne," Harrison boomed, his voice thundering through the library. "The video plays to the end, or you forfeit your right to be in this room." Julian glared, his face turning a mottled red, but he sank back into his chair. "You treated your wife like an accessory, and your unborn child like an inconvenience," Arthur said, his voice trembling with anger on the recording. "You ridiculed her for her background. You made her feel small to make yourself feel big. And for that, I have made a decision that will likely shock you." On the screen, Arthur leaned forward. "To my son, Julian, I leave the sum of $1. The room exploded. "What?" Julian screamed, knocking his chair over as he stood up. $1? This is a joke. It's a sick joke." $1, the video confirmed. "And my vintage collection of cufflinks. You always liked looking the part of a businessman. Now you'll have the cufflinks for it. But you will not have the company. You will not have the accounts. You will not have the real estate." "Then who gets it?" Beatrice shrieked, standing up to grab Julian's arm. "Who gets the billions, Arthur? You can't give it to charity. I won't allow it." On the screen, Arthur smiled. It was a warm, genuine smile, the one he used to give Hannah. The entirety of the Thorne estate, including 51% controlling interest in Thorne Enterprises, the real estate portfolio, and the liquid assets, is hereby bequeathed to the one person in this family who has a heart, Mrs. Hannah Thorne, and the grandchild she carries. The silence that followed was heavier than the grave. Every head in the room turned slowly, like rusty machinery, toward the back corner where Hannah sat on her folding chair. She was frozen, her hands clutching her belly, her eyes wide with shock. Julian turned slowly. His face was no longer handsome. It was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. He looked at Hannah not as his wife, but as a thief who had just stolen his life. "You," Julian whispered, the word sounding like a curse. "This concludes the video testament," Harrison said calmly, switching off the projector. He looked at Hannah. "Mrs. Thorne, if you would please come take your seat at the head of the table. We have much to discuss." "No!" Julian roared. He lunged across the room, rushing toward Hannah. "You manipulated him! You poisoned him against me! You pathetic little—" "Security!" Harrison barked. Two large men in dark suits, who had been standing discreetly by the bookshelves, stepped forward, intercepting Julian inches before he reached Hannah. They held him back, his arms flailing, his face purple with rage. "It's a lie!" Julian screamed, spit flying from his mouth. "She's a nobody! She's nothing! That baby isn't even mine! I'll prove it! I'll sue the estate! I'll bury you, Hannah! Do you hear me? I'll bury you!" Hannah stood up. Her legs were shaking, but a strange fire was starting to burn in her chest. She looked at the man she had feared for so long. She looked at Savannah, who was currently trying to sneak out the side door. She looked at Beatrice, who was clutching her chest in fake palpitations. Hannah took a step forward, then another. She walked past the security guards, holding her screaming husband. She walked past the stunned board members. She reached the head of the table, Arthur's chair. The leather was still warm from where Julian had been sitting. She placed her hand on the back of the chair, looked Harrison in the eye, and spoke her first words since the reading began. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "Please remove the trespassers from my house. I have business to attend to." Julian's scream of incoherent rage echoed through the manor as the guards dragged him out into the rain. But the drama was far from over. Julian Thorne was not a man who lost gracefully, and as Hannah would soon find out, the will was just the beginning of the war. The rain had not stopped when Julian Thorne found himself standing on the curb outside his own estate, the heavy iron gates groaning shut electronically behind him. He was soaked to the bone, his custom Italian suit ruined. "This is insane," Savannah shivered, clutching her arms. Her mascara was running down her face in black rivulets. "Julian, call the driver back. Tell him to take us to the Four Seasons. I can't stand out here like a hobo." Julian pulled out his phone, his hands shaking with a mixture of cold and blinding rage. He dialed the number for the private car service the company used. "This is Julian Thorne. I need a car at the main gate immediately." "I'm sorry, Mr. Thorne." The dispatcher's voice was cool, robotic. "That account has been suspended, as of 10 minutes ago, by order of the executor." "Suspended? Do you know who I am? I own the company." Julian roared into the receiver. "Actually, sir, the memo we received states you are a former employee with no clearance. Have a nice day." The line clicked dead. Julian screamed, hurling his phone onto the wet asphalt. It shattered, a fitting metaphor for his life in the last hour. "My car," Beatrice said, her voice trembling. She was standing a few feet away, holding a small box of silverware she had managed to swipe from the dining room before being ushered out. "My driver, Jenkins. He's still on the payroll, surely." But Jenkins was nowhere to be seen. Instead, a sleek black sedan pulled up. It wasn't a limo, it was a standard Uber. The window rolled down to reveal Harrison Blackwood's stony face. "I took the liberty of calling you a ride," Harrison said, extending a hand out the window to drop 3 $20 bills onto the wet pavement. "Arthur left you $1, but I'm feeling generous. This should get you to a motel." "I will kill you, Harrison." Julian lunged at the car, but the window rolled up, and the sedan sped off, splashing mud onto Julian's trousers. The humiliation was absolute. 3 hours later, the trio, Julian, Savannah, and Beatrice, sat in a cramped room at a budget hotel near the highway. The smell of stale cigarettes and mildew hung in the air. Savannah was sitting on the bed, scrolling frantically through her phone. "My credit cards are blocked," she whispered, her voice rising in panic. "Julian, the Platinum Amex is declined. The Gold card is declined. Even my personal debit card is frozen." "Harrison acts fast," Julian muttered, pacing the small room. He had stripped off his wet jacket and was drinking cheap vodka from a plastic cup. "He's frozen the joint accounts. He's probably flagged our personal accounts for audit to tie them up for weeks." "This is that witch's doing," Beatrice spat, wiping a spot of dirt off her skirt. "Hannah, that quiet, mousy little nothing. She planned this. She seduced Arthur." "She didn't seduce him, Mother. He was 80, Julian snapped. "She manipulated him. She played the pity card." "What are we going to do?" Savannah whined. "I can't live like this. I have a spa appointment tomorrow. I have a lease on the condo." Julian stopped pacing. He walked over to the dirty window and looked out at the highway traffic. His reflection in the glass looked haggard, wild-eyed. He didn't look like a billionaire anymore. He looked like a desperate man. But desperate men were dangerous men. "We aren't going to live like this," Julian said, his voice dropping to a sinister growl. Arthur thought he was clever. He thought giving everything to Hannah would protect her. But he forgot one thing. "What?" Beatrice asked. "Hannah is weak." Julian turned, a cruel smile forming on his lips. "She's fragile, she's pregnant, hormonal, and has zero business experience. She's sitting on a throne she doesn't know how to defend." "And?" Savannah asked. "And the will," Julian said, pacing again, his mind racing. "I remember the wording. Harrison read it. To Mrs. Hannah Thorne and the grandchild she carries." "So?" "So," Julian laughed darkly. "If that baby isn't Arthur's grandchild, the clause is void. If I can prove that the baby isn't mine. If I can prove Hannah is a whore who cheated on me, then the will is invalid. The estate defaults to the next of kin. Me. But the baby is yours, Savannah pointed out. You haven't let her out of the house in months. The truth doesn't matter, Savannah, Julian snapped. Perception matters. The courts matter. If I file a motion contesting paternity, it freezes the assets until the baby is born and a DNA test is done. That buys us 2 months. In those 2 months, we destroy her. We stress her out. We make her look incompetent to the board. We make her crack. Beatrice's eyes lit up. If she miscarries, she trailed off, the implication hanging in the air like poison. If there is no baby, the grandchild clause fails. It was a monstrous thought. Even Julian paused for a second. But then he remembered the mud on his shoes. He remembered the laughter of the board members. He remembered the $1. We go to the press, Julian decided. Tomorrow morning, we paint her as the gold digger. We say she tricked a senile old man and cuckolded his son. We turn the world against Hannah Thorne. Back at Thorne Manor, the silence was deafening. Hannah sat in the master bedroom, a room she had never been allowed to sleep in. It was Arthur and Beatrice's room, but Beatrice had moved to the guest wing years ago. Now it was hers. The bed was the size of a small island, covered in silk sheets that felt cool against her skin. She hadn't slept. It was 3 a.m. A light knock on the door made her jump. "Come in," she called out, her voice shaky. The door creaked open, and Thomas, the butler, stepped in, carrying a silver tray with a steaming mug and a small plate of toast. "I thought you might be hungry, madam," Thomas said gently. "You didn't eat at the reception." Hannah looked at the old man. He had worked for the Thornes for 40 years. Did he hate her too? Did he think she stole this house? "Thomas," Hannah asked, sitting up, "do you think I deserve this?" Thomas set the tray down on the nightstand. He clasped his hands behind his back and looked at her with kind, watery eyes. "Mr. Arthur was a hard man, madam, but he was a good judge of character in his later years. He saw how Mr. Julian treated you. He saw you crying in the garden when you thought no one was looking. He told me once, 'Thomas, that girl has a spine of steel. She just doesn't know it yet.'" Hannah smiled weakly. "I don't feel like steel. I feel like I'm about to break." "That is exactly what Mr. Julian wants," Thomas said. "But you have something he doesn't." "What's that?" "You have Mr. Blackwood, and you have the staff. Most of us, we didn't care much for Mr. Julian. He was cruel to the maids. He didn't tip the drivers. You were always kind. You asked about our families. Kindness is a currency, Mrs. Thorne, and you are very rich in it." Hannah took a sip of the tea. It was chamomile, just how she liked it. "Thank you, Thomas." "Rest now," he said. "The wolves will howl in the morning." Thomas was right. The wolves didn't just howl, they attacked. The next morning, Hannah was awakened not by sunlight, but by the ringing of the bedside phone. It was Harrison. "Don't turn on the TV," Harrison said immediately, "and don't look at your phone." "Harrison, what's happening?" Hannah rubbed her eyes, struggling to sit up. Her back pain was worse today. "Julian has gone on Good Morning America," Harrison sighed. "He's spinning a narrative. He's claiming you had an affair with a pool boy and that the baby isn't a Thorne. He's filing a lawsuit to contest the will based on paternity fraud." Hannah felt the blood drain from her face. "But that's a lie. He knows that's a lie. It doesn't matter. The court of public opinion moves faster than the legal system. There are paparazzi at the gate, Hannah, hundreds of them. They are calling you the billion-dollar mistress." Hannah dropped the phone. She walked to the window and peered through the heavy velvet curtains. Down below, at the end of the long driveway, she could see them. A swarm of cameras, news vans, and people shouting. She felt a sharp cramp in her stomach. Stress. The doctor had warned her about stress. I can't do this, she thought. I should just give him the money. I should just sign it over and leave. She went downstairs, intending to find Harrison and tell him to settle. She wanted out, but as she walked past the library, she saw something. The door was ajar. She walked in, drawn by the memory of yesterday's victory. On the desk, where Arthur's video projector had been, sat a single red leather notebook. It hadn't been there yesterday. Hannah walked over and picked it up. On the cover, in shaky handwriting, was written, "For Hannah. Read when you want to quit." Her hands trembling, she opened the book. "My dearest Hannah, if you are reading this, Julian has attacked. I knew he would. He is predictable in his greed. He has likely slandered you, sued you, and tried to scare you. He thinks you are weak. He thinks you are just a nice girl. But I know the truth. I saw you fight for your marriage even when it was hopeless. I saw you protect your unborn child when Julian wanted you to terminate the pregnancy. You are a mother, Hannah. And mothers are the most dangerous creatures on earth when their young are threatened. Inside this desk, there is a hidden drawer. Press the knot in the wood on the right leg. Inside, you will find a file labeled Project Icarus. Julian has secrets. Dark secrets. Secrets that would send him to prison, not just the poorhouse. I kept them as insurance. Now they are your sword. Don't settle, don't run, fight him, love Arthur." Hannah stared at the letter. Tears streamed down her face, but her heart was pounding with a new rhythm. It wasn't fear anymore, it was adrenaline. She knelt down and found the knot on the desk leg. She pressed it. A click echoed, and a hidden panel popped open. Inside was a thick black folder. She opened it. Photos, bank statements, emails. It wasn't just offshore accounts, it was evidence of embezzlement. Julian hadn't just been waiting for his father to die. He had been stealing from the company for years to fund his gambling debts and Savannah's lifestyle. And worse, there were emails implicating him in bribing safety inspectors for one of the Thorn construction projects, a project where a collapse had injured 3 workers last year. Arthur had known. He had gathered the evidence, but couldn't bring himself to destroy his own son while he was alive. He had left the trigger for Hannah to pull. The front door of the manor banged open. Hannah jumped, clutching the file to her chest. She heard shouting in the foyer. "I live here. You can't keep me out. I need my personal effects." It was Julian. He had come back, likely with the press in tow, to cause a scene. He wanted to catch her looking scared. Hannah stood up. She wiped the tears from her face. She looked down at her swollen belly. "For you," she whispered to her daughter. "Daddy is going to learn a lesson." She didn't hide the file. She held it in her hand like a weapon. She walked out of the library and into the grand foyer. Julian was there, arguing with Thomas and 2 security guards. A cameraman from a news station was standing behind him, filming the whole thing. "Where is she?" Julian shouted, playing to the camera. "Where is the woman who stole my family's legacy?" "I'm right here, Julian," Hannah said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried through the high-ceilinged hall like a bell. Julian turned, a smirk on his face. "Ah, there she is, the grieving widow." "Tell the camera, Hannah, who is the real father? Is it the pool boy, or maybe the driver?" The cameraman zoomed in on Hannah's face. Hannah didn't flinch. She walked down the stairs, 1 step at a time, her hand resting on the banister. She stopped 3 steps from the bottom, looking down at Julian. "You want to talk about truth, Julian?" she asked calmly. "Let's talk about truth." She held up the black folder. Let's talk about Project Icarus. The color drained from Julian's face so fast it looked like he had been slapped. The smirk vanished. His eyes darted to the camera, then back to the folder. What is that? He stammered. You know what this is, Hannah said, her voice turning hard. It's the reason you aren't just going to be poor, Julian. It's the reason you're going to prison. She turned to the cameraman. Are you recording? Good, because I think the police will want a copy of this broadcast. Julian lunged. Give me that! But this time Hannah didn't flinch, and this time the security guards didn't wait for an order. As Julian rushed the stairs, the lead guard tackled him, pinning the former billionaire to the marble floor of the house he used to rule. Get off me, Julian screamed. Hannah walked past him, stepping over his struggling body. She walked straight to the front door, opened it, and faced the sea of paparazzi outside. She raised the file. My name is Hannah Thorne, she announced to the flashing bulbs, and I have a statement to make regarding the criminal activities of my soon-to-be ex-husband. The war hadn't just begun. Hannah had just dropped the bomb. The photo of Julian Thorne being shoved into the back of a police cruiser, his hands cuffed behind his back and his custom suit torn at the shoulder, was on the front page of every newspaper in the country. The headline of the New York Chronicle read simply, The Fall of the House of Thorne. Inside the holding cell at the 19th Precinct, the air smelled of bleach and despair. Julian sat on a metal bench, his head in his hands. He had been processed like a common criminal, fingerprinted, mugshot taken, his shoelaces removed so he wouldn't hang himself. It wasn't supposed to end like this. He was a thorn. The police commissioner played golf with his father. But Arthur was dead, and the commissioner wasn't taking Julian's calls. Thorne, you made bail, a guard grunted, unlocking the cell door. Julian stood up, his legs stiff. About time, my lawyer. No lawyer, just a woman, blonde. Julian smirked. Savannah. At least she was loyal. He walked out to the processing desk, signing for his meager possessions. He walked out into the cool night air, expecting the limousine. Instead, he saw Savannah standing next to a yellow taxi, 2 large Louis Vuitton suitcases at her feet. She wasn't smiling. Savannah, Julian said, rushing toward her. Thank God, we need to get to the penthouse. I need to call my offshore contacts and... I'm leaving, Julian, Savannah said, checking her reflection in the taxi window. Julian stopped dead. What? I'm going to my sister's in Miami, she said, not even looking at him. The feds froze the accounts, Julian. All of them. Even the ones you put in my name. They're talking about RICO charges. Fraud. Embezzlement. It's a misunderstanding. I'll fix it. You can't fix this, she laughed, a cold, brittle sound. You're done. You're toxic. If I stay with you, I go down with you. And I don't do prison orange. She opened the taxi door. Savannah, wait! You can't leave me. I bought you that coat. I bought you everything, Julian screamed, grabbing her arm. She pulled away, her nails digging into his wrist. You bought me with stolen money. Goodbye, Julian. She slammed the door. The taxi sped off, leaving Julian standing alone on the sidewalk. He had no car, no money, no wife, no mistress, and a court date that would likely end in a 10-year sentence. He reached into his pocket and found the only thing the police had returned to him, besides his wallet, the pair of cufflinks Arthur had left him in the will. He stared at the gold-engraved initials, A.T., Arthur Thorne. You did this, Julian whispered to the sky, his eyes burning with a madness that had been brewing for days. You and that pregnant witch. You took my life. He didn't go to the penthouse. He knew the locks would be changed. Instead, he walked into the darkness of the city, a plan forming in his shattered mind. If he was going to burn, He was going to take Hannah with him. While Julian was hitting rock bottom, Hannah was ascending. The boardroom of Thorn Enterprises was located on the 40th floor of a glass skyscraper in Manhattan. The view was breathtaking, but the atmosphere inside was suffocating. 12 men sat around the granite table. These were the sharks, the board members who had enabled Julian's behavior for years because the stock price was high. They looked at Hannah with skepticism. She was 8.5 months pregnant, wearing a maternity dress and a blazer. She didn't look like a CEO. "Mrs. Thorn," said Marcus Sterling, the chairman of the board. He was a man with silver hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We appreciate you coming in during such a delicate time. But frankly, the shareholders are in a panic. The stock has dropped 15% since Julian's arrest." "I am aware of the numbers, Mr. Sterling," Hannah said, her voice steady. Harrison sat beside her, acting as her silent anchor. "We believe it is in the best interest of the company for you to sell your controlling shares," Sterling continued. "We have a buyer lined up, a private equity firm. They will offer you a generous buyout. You can raise your child in peace, away from this mess." The other men nodded. "Sell. Leave. Go back to being a nobody." Hannah looked at the folder in front of her. It wasn't the Project Icarus file. That was with the district attorney. This was a different file Arthur had prepared. "Gentlemen," Hannah said, standing up. It was difficult, but she refused to negotiate sitting down. "You think I am here to cash out? You think I am a naive girl who stumbled into a fortune?" "We didn't say that," Sterling lied. "My husband, Julian, stole from this company," Hannah said. "But he didn't do it alone. You, Mr. Sterling, signed off on the chaotic construction loans in Jersey. You, Mr. Henderson, overlooked the safety reports." She opened the folder and slid a single sheet of paper down the table. It stopped in front of Sterling. He looked down. His face went pale. It was an email chain proving he knew about the embezzlement and had taken a cut to keep quiet. "Arthur knew everything," Hannah said, her voice ringing with authority. "He kept records on everyone. He told me that if you tried to push me out, I was to release these to the SEC. Silence descended on the room. The air conditioning hummed. "Now," Hannah said, leaning forward, her hands flat on the table. "Here is what is going to happen. There will be no buyout. I am keeping my shares. I am appointing Harrison Blackwood as interim CEO effective immediately, and we are going to launch a full internal audit to clean this company of the rot that my husband, and some of you, introduced." She looked Sterling in the eye. "Do we have an agreement, or do I make another phone call to the press?" Sterling swallowed hard. He looked at the other board members. They were all looking at their shoes. "We have an agreement, Mrs. Thorn," Sterling whispered. Hannah nodded. "Good. Meeting adjourned." She walked out of the boardroom, her head held high. But as soon as the heavy glass doors closed behind her, she collapsed against the wall, trembling. "You did it," Harrison said, catching her arm gently. "Arthur would be proud. You were magnificent." "I just want to go home, Harrison," Hannah whispered, rubbing her belly. "The baby. She's kicking so hard today. I think she knows her mum was fighting a war." "Let's get you home," Harrison said. "Thomas has prepared the nursery. You're safe now, Hannah. Julian is out on bail, but he has no resources. He's finished." But Harrison was wrong. A man with nothing left to lose is never finished. He is just beginning to be truly dangerous. 2 weeks passed. The media frenzy had died down slightly, replaced by the anticipation of the trial. Hannah had retreated to the sanctuary of Thorn Manor. Her due date was a week away, and her doctor had ordered strict bed rest. The night the storm hit, The sky turned a bruised purple. The wind howled through the chimneys of the old manor like a grieving ghost. Rain lashed against the windows in violent sheets. "The power lines are down in the lower valley," Thomas said, placing a battery-powered lantern on Hannah's bedside table. The manor was running on backup generators, casting the hallways in dim, flickering shadows. "Security says the electric gates are stuck in the closed position, but the perimeter alarms are active on battery backup." "Thank you, Thomas," Hannah said. She was lying in bed, feeling a strange, rhythmic tightening in her lower back. Are the phones working? Landlines are dead. Cell service is spotty because of the storm, Thomas noted, looking concerned. "How are you feeling, madam?" "Just uncomfortable. Braxton Hicks, I think," she lied. She didn't want to worry him. "I'll be downstairs in the kitchen if you need anything. I've instructed the night guard, Miller, to patrol the hallway." Thomas left, closing the door softly. Hannah closed her eyes, listening to the thunder. The tightening in her back came again, sharper this time. She timed it. 5 minutes since the last one. "It's happening," she realized with a jolt of panic. "The baby is coming. Now." She reached for her cell phone to call Harrison, but the signal bars were empty. "No, no, no," she whispered. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from downstairs. It wasn't thunder. It was the sound of glass shattering, a lot of it. Then, the muffled sound of a shout, followed by a heavy thud. "Miller!" Hannah called out, sitting up. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The door to her bedroom didn't open. But the silence that followed the crash was more terrifying than the noise. She swung her legs out of bed, wincing as a contraction seized her abdomen. She needed to hide. She didn't know who was downstairs, but her instinct screamed Julian. She grabbed the heavy brass lamp from the bedside table. She moved toward the bathroom, intending to lock herself in. But before she could reach the door, the bedroom handle turned. It was locked. "Hannah!" A voice called from the other side. It was a voice she knew intimately, but it sounded wrong, slurred, rough, broken. "Go away, Julian," she screamed. "Miller! Thomas! Miller is taking a nap." Julian laughed. "And old Thomas? Well, let's just say he's retired." Crash! Julian kicked the door. The wood splintered around the lock. Hannah backed away, clutching her belly with one hand and the lamp with the other. "I called the police," she lied. "No, you didn't," Julian said. Another kick. The door flew open. Lightning flashed, illuminating the figure in the doorway. Julian looked like a nightmare. He was wearing dark clothes, soaked through with rain. His hair was plastered to his skull. He held a crowbar in his right hand, water dripping from the metal tip onto the expensive carpet. "You changed the locks," Julian said, stepping into the room. "But you forgot about the servant's entrance in the pantry. I used to sneak girls in that way in high school." "What do you want?" Hannah gasped, backing up until her legs hit the edge of the bed. Another contraction hit her, paralyzing her with pain. She groaned, doubling over. Julian watched her, his eyes devoid of empathy. "You're in labor. Majestic timing, truly." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a crumpled document. "This," he said, throwing the paper onto the bed, "is a document stating that you knowingly committed paternity fraud. It states that you admit the child is not a Thorne. It signs over full custody of the estate back to me in exchange for your freedom." "I won't sign that," Hannah gritted out, breathing through the pain. "The baby is yours. You know it is." "Sign it!" Julian roared, swinging the crowbar and smashing the vanity mirror. Glass exploded across the room. "I have nothing, Hannah. Do you understand? I am looking at 20 years in prison. But if I have the money, if I have the company, I can make it go away. Money fixes everything." "Money can't fix you," Hannah said, tears streaming down her face. "You're broken, Julian." He advanced on her. "Sign the paper, or so help me God, I will beat the signature out of you." "Get away from her." Thomas appeared in the doorway. The old butler was bleeding from a gash on his forehead, his arm hanging limp at his side, but he was holding Arthur's old hunting shotgun. "Thomas, no!" Hannah screamed. Julian spun around. He saw the gun. He didn't freeze. He laughed. "You don't have the guts, old man. You spent your life serving tea." "I served in Vietnam before I served tea, Mr. Julian," Thomas said, his voice shaking but his aim steady. "Put the crowbar down." Julian's eyes darted between Thomas and Hannah. He calculated the odds. He was younger, faster. He lunged, not at Thomas but at Hannah. "No!" Thomas fired. The shotgun blast was deafening in the enclosed room. But Thomas, injured and dizzy, missed center mass. The buckshot tore into the wall inches from Julian's head. The distraction was enough. Julian tackled Hannah onto the bed, the crowbar raised. "You ruined everything!" he screamed, his hands closing around her throat. Hannah couldn't breathe. The world started to go black. The pain of the contraction merged with the pain of suffocation. She clawed at his face, her nails digging into his eyes. Julian howled, pulling back for a split second. In that second, Hannah didn't think. She reacted. She grabbed the heavy brass lamp she had dropped on the bed and swung it with every ounce of hysterical strength she possessed. The solid brass base connected with Julian's temple with a sickening crack. Julian went rigid. His eyes rolled back. He collapsed sideways, sliding off the bed and hitting the floor with a heavy thud. He didn't move. Hannah gasped for air, coughing, clutching her throat. "Madam!" Thomas dropped the gun and rushed to her side, ignoring his own injuries. "Is he—" Hannah couldn't finish the sentence. Thomas checked Julian's pulse. "He's alive, unconscious, but alive." Just then, blue and red lights flashed through the shattered window. The sound of sirens cut through the storm. "The silent alarm," Thomas whispered. "I pressed it before I came up." Hannah fell back onto the pillows, her water breaking. "Thomas!" she cried out, gripping his hand. "The baby, she's coming." "Help is here, madam," Thomas said, tears mixing with the blood on his face. "You're safe. The wolves are gone." Paramedics stormed the room minutes later. They stepped over the unconscious body of the former billionaire to get to the woman who had defeated him. As they loaded Hannah onto the stretcher, she looked down at Julian one last time. He looked small, pathetic. The monster had been reduced to a man on the floor. "Take him away," she whispered. And then the real work began. The storm broke just as the sun began to rise over Greenwich Hospital. In the quiet warmth of the maternity ward, far removed from the shattered glass and violence of the manor, a cry pierced the air. It was a strong, defiant cry. Hannah held her daughter for the first time. She was tiny, but she had Arthur's eyes, a piercing, intelligent blue. "She's perfect," Thomas whispered. The old butler sat in the chair next to the bed, a bandage wrapped around his head and his arm in a sling. He refused to leave her side until the security detail Harrison hired had arrived. "I'm naming her Victoria," Hannah said softly, kissing the baby's forehead. "Because she won. We won." The fallout of that night was swift and brutal for Julian Thorne. The Project Icarus files provided the FBI with everything they needed to charge him with racketeering, wire fraud, and embezzlement. But it was the attempted murder charge that sealed his fate. The trial was the media event of the decade. Julian tried to plead insanity, but the video footage from the hallway cameras, which had been running on battery backup, showed a cold, calculated man breaking into the room. The final nail in his coffin came from the DNA test. The results were read aloud in open court. Victoria was, without a shadow of a doubt, Julian's daughter and Arthur's granddaughter. Julian's defense of paternity fraud crumbled into dust. He was sentenced to 30 years in a maximum security federal prison. As he was led away in shackles, stripped of his suits, his name, and his dignity, he looked back at the gallery. Hannah was there. She didn't look down. She looked him in the eye, her expression unreadable. She didn't hate him anymore. He was simply a ghost of a past she had survived. Savannah Rain avoided prison by turning state's witness against Julian, but her social life was over. Blacklisted from every high society circle in New York and broke, she faded into obscurity, a cautionary tale of greed. 1 year later, Thorne Manor was unrecognizable. The gloomy, museum-like atmosphere was gone. The heavy velvet curtains were replaced with sheer linen that let the sunlight flood in. The silence of the library was replaced by the sound of cartoons playing on the TV and the giggles of a toddler. Hannah didn't just inherit the empire, she reinvented it. With Harrison as her advisor, she cleaned house. She sold off the corrupt construction division and used the billions to launch the Arthur Thorne Foundation, a charity dedicated to providing legal aid and housing for women escaping abusive relationships. On the anniversary of Arthur's death, Hannah stood in the garden. It wasn't raining this time. The sun was warm on her face. "Mama!" Victoria, now a chubby-cheeked 1-year-old, waddled across the grass, chasing a butterfly. Thomas, now officially retired but living in the guest cottage as the family's honorary grandfather, followed close behind, smiling. Hannah took a deep breath. She had walked into this house as a victim, a ridiculed wife, dismissed and mocked. She stood there now as a mother, a CEO, and a survivor. She looked up at the blue sky. "Thank you, Arthur," she whispered, "for the $1. And for the fight." The best revenge wasn't seeing Julian in prison. The best revenge was standing here, happy, free, and loved. And that is the incredible story of Hannah Thorne. She proved that dignity is worth more than diamonds, and that while money can buy power, it cannot buy loyalty or love. Julian thought he could crush her because she was quiet, but he forgot that the calmest water often hides the deepest strength. What do you think? Did Julian get what he deserved, or was 30 years too light a sentence for what he did? And would you have forgiven Savannah? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice and karma, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story. Until next time, stay safe and be kind.